The first light didn't arrive like a sunrise. It arrived like a verdict. A thin seam of pale gold slid over the ridgeline and spilled into the valley, and in that instant the shallow wadi stopped being cover and became a bowl. Dust hung in the air like a hell breath. Cold air bit at exposed skin. Every inhale tasted of grit and smoke, and every exhale came out faint and white, giving away where men were trying not to exist. They were pinned, 4 bodies flattened into the dirt, shoulders pressed into rock, knees jammed under broken stone. One of them was bleeding hard. A pressure dressing had been packed and repacked, and it still darkened, spreading with every heartbeat. The wounded man's jaw worked soundlessly like he was chewing pain into smaller pieces, trying to swallow it. Behind them, the supply shack burned. It had been a rough thing to begin with: plywood walls, corrugated scraps, tarp lashed down with fraying cord. A cash point, not a home. But now it was a torch, flames licking at the tarps and climbing the timber as if the structure had been waiting for this all along. Ammunition cooked off inside, sharp pops that sounded like distant firecrackers, mocking the real gunfire that kept the team trapped. Oily smoke rolled down into the wadi, the wind pushing it low and dirty, smearing visibility, stinging eyes, turning every glance toward the ridgeline into a squint and a guess. The enemy on that ridgeline didn't guess. Fire came in controlled bursts, short, disciplined strings, then pauses, then another set. Not wild, not panicked. The shots weren't trying to drown them. They were trying to shape them. Every time the team leader lifted his head, a round smacked stone close enough to chip his cover and warn him back down. Every time someone shifted a knee or tried to drag the wounded man deeper, dirt flicked up beside their hands. The enemy wasn't just shooting at bodies. They were shooting at decisions. Then a mortar came. Not a full barrage, just a single feel-out round that thumped into the dirt nearby, throwing a cone of dust and stone into the wadi. Close enough to rattle teeth. Not close enough to kill. A message: we can walk this in whenever we want. The team leader fumbled for the radio again anyway. He pressed the transmit, heard crackle, hoped for half a second, and then the line went dead. He tried again, switching channels, changing power settings, pleading with a satellite link that wouldn't lock. Nothing. A valley shadow could do that sometimes. So could a jammer. Either way, their lifeline was gone. Hand signals took over. A fist to freeze. 2 fingers to indicate movement. A flat palm to get lower. But smoke stole their line of sight, and a wadi that was supposed to connect them now chopped them into pockets. The wounded man's breathing turned ragged, shallow. His buddy pressed harder on the dressing until his hands trembled, trying to stop what the body insisted on doing. Somewhere above, a faint mosquito whine drifted in and out, thin, mechanical, almost easy to mistake for imagination until it returned again and again. A drone, not a big one, not loud enough to be seen easily, just a buzzing eye in the sky that could nudge mortar fire, cue rifles, record everything. The enemy fire tightened like a noose being tested. The team leader glanced at his watch through the smudged glass. Their extraction window was already bleeding away. Miss it, and they'd be here until night, if they were here at all. Then the pressure changed. A new sound threaded in a pattern. Boots on rock, gear clinking soft. A pair of enemy fighters shifted downslope. An RPG team. The launcher silhouette cut through smoke for half a second, long enough for everyone in the wadi to understand what it meant. One shot into their last piece of solid cover, and the wadi would become a shallow grave. The RPG gunner shouldered the launcher, and then the world found a kind of silence that didn't belong there. One clean crack, sharp, isolated, rolled across the valley from somewhere far off, not part of the enemy's rhythm, not part of the pinned team's desperate return fire. It was a different sound entirely, a single note in a violent song. The RPG gunner folded as if his strings had been cut. The launcher clattered into the dirt. The second man froze, staring down at his partner like he couldn't process how a plan could die so quickly. The enemy's tempo stuttered. Their bursts hesitated, a machine losing power. Down in the wadi, the team didn't see the shooter. They only saw what changed. Someone was out there. Calm. Choosing targets. The team leader's eyes lifted to the ridgeline, searching for movement, for a glint, for anything. Smoke slid past his face. The dawn light edged the rocks. He swallowed grit and fear and a question that felt too big for his mouth. Who's on that ridge, and why did she wait for sunrise? Hours earlier, none of this had been visible. None of it had seemed inevitable. The afternoon before had been routine in the way that makes people lazy. A rugged border valley, terraced rock, scrub brush, the kind of terrain that looked empty until you learned how many places a person could hide in it. A ridgeline owned the basin, long and jagged, throwing shadows like a warning. But the patrol route had been run before. The unit had walked it in heat and cold, in wind and quiet, and they'd come back every time. They were tired, confident. The most dangerous kind of confident. The supply shack sat where the valley bent. A forward cache point for the rotating patrol route. Water, medical supplies, spare batteries. A place to top off and keep moving. And tucked away in a sealed case, something no one talked about. They didn't need to talk about it. The case spoke with the way it was handled. 2 hands. Always clipped to someone. Always kept close. The team leader's words were simple. Priority cargo. Above pay grade. Don't ask. Don't lose it. Most of the team didn't want to ask anyway. They joked about food back at base, about sleep, about anything that wasn't the long stretch of dirt ahead. They swapped insults like it was armor. They wanted the route done before night. They wanted the shack topped off and the valley behind them. One person didn't move like she wanted to be done. She moved like she wanted to be right. She was the quiet one, overwatch when needed, logistics when not. The kind of operator people underestimated because she didn't fill silence with stories. She checked angles more than she checked jokes. She listened to the valley's empty spaces, the places where sound should have been and wasn't. A higher-ranked voice had sidelined her more than once. Not harshly, not with cruelty, just with that casual kind of dismissal that hurts because it's effortless. Like she was extra weight until the moment someone needed precision. She didn't argue. She took what she was given, and she watched. Near the shack, she noticed boot scuffs where no friendly patrol should have been. The marks were faint, the kind most people would chalk up to animals or old tracks. She saw a broken rock cairn that had been used as a navigation marker, split, shifted like someone had disturbed it to see what was underneath. And then there was the smell near the hinge of the shack door, a faint chemical bite under the dust and sun-baked wood. Not natural, not from old fuel. Something sharper. She brought it up, quietly, to the team leader. He listened, the way a good leader listens even when he doesn't agree. He nodded, and then the schedule pressed in, and the mood of routine won. They ran a comms check as they moved. At a specific bend in the valley, the radio fluttered, static, a brief stumble of sound, then it cleared. Easy to blame, on terrain. The valley could play tricks. But she clocked it. The timing. The exact location. The way it felt like someone had brushed a hand over a switch and pulled away. She suggested a small change. Higher overwatch, wider spacing, a different approach angle to the shack. Not a full rewrite. Just a tweak. It was waved off as overcautious. The team wanted to finish before night. The higher-ranked voice didn't want extra steps. Routine pushed forward. That night, they slept light. The valley was too open for deep sleep, too close to the kind of places trouble liked to live. Most of them dozed in short cycles, waking to check the dark and settle again. She stayed half awake, listening. Sometimes you could hear engines far away, faint like the memory of sound. Sometimes you could hear a drone note, thin and distant. Or maybe it was the wind. The mind plays games in the dark. Before dawn, she was up first. Not dramatic. Not announcing it. She checked her rifle with practiced care, ran fingers along the stock, cleaned dust from where dust didn't belong. She checked her dope cards and the small marks she'd made for wind and elevation, simple anchors that could turn a guess into a certainty. Then she paused, just for a second, at the small token in her kit. Something personal, something she never explained. She held it like a quiet promise, then stowed it away. Outside, she watched the ridge, the shadows it threw, the way first light would silhouette movement against rock, the way sunrise could blind a scope if you didn't account for it, and the way it could give you a target if you did. She wasn't setting the board because she believed the enemy was coming. She was setting the board because she knew routine was the enemy. When the patrol moved again, the valley felt wrong. Not loud, not obviously dangerous. Wrong in the way a room feels wrong when someone's been in it without telling you. The shack appeared through the scrub and stone, quiet, waiting. They approached to top off water and swap batteries. Hands reached for straps. A moment of ordinary. Then the first contact snapped reality in half. A suppressed shot. Someone dropped before anyone heard the report. The kind of kill that makes you feel naked because it proves someone has been watching you longer than you've been watching them. High ground owned them. The ridgeline wasn't scenery anymore. It was a weapon. The shack ignited fast, too fast, like it had been prepped. Flames chewed through tarps as if the tarps were soaked. Smoke rolled down, thick and hungry, forcing the team away from the very supplies they'd come to collect. Ammo cooked off inside, adding chaos to the enemy's controlled bursts. The constraint stack hit them hard, one layer after another. Comms failed, radio dead, satellite link unreliable. The valley shadow alone didn't explain the complete collapse. It felt active. Smoke reduced visibility, turning long-range threats into invisible certainty. Range estimation became harder. Identifying muzzle flashes became guesswork. Ammo consumption spiked. Returning fire at unseen positions burned magazines fast, and the barrels began to heat. Every trigger pull felt necessary and wasteful at the same time. A teammate was wounded early. Not killed, wounded. Enough to slow movement, to anchor everyone's decisions to a bleeding body and the human instinct to protect it. Terrain disadvantage locked in. The enemy had elevation, sight lines, and prepared firing lanes. The wadi became a funnel. The enemy used geometry like a professional. Bursts herded the team into the shallow wadi. Then mortars began to walk rounds near the edges, bracketing escape routes. Not yet landing on them, just tightening the fence. The drone's buzz grew clearer. It wasn't just observing. It was cueing corrections, making the mortar smarter, making the rifles feel like they could see through smoke. The team leader tried to rally a breakout, but every attempt was punished. They were being conditioned to stay pinned until the enemy got what they wanted. The enemy didn't need to rush. They needed time. And then, by circumstance and dismissal, the quiet one wasn't in the wadi when it became a trap. She'd been tasked to check an outer angle, busy work, a way to keep her occupied while the others handled the resupply. It should have been irrelevant. It became everything. From her offset position, she saw the ambush shape from the side. Not just shooters, but roles. One element fixing the team in place. One observing, likely feeding corrections. One prepping movement down toward the shack's remains. And she saw something that made the whole thing click. Two enemy fighters moved with intent toward the sealed case area. Not toward the wadi. Not to finish the pin team. Toward the objective. They weren't here for bodies. They were here for something the bodies were guarding. She felt the temptation of protocol, the urge to rejoin the team, to take cover with them, to wait for orders and comms and permission. But comms were dead. Orders wouldn't come. And Tai was being bought with their blood. So she made a decision that broke the shape of how things were supposed to go. No radio. No clearance. No permission. She moved alone. She dropped into a side ravine where rock shadows pooled. The wind pushed smoke in shifting curtains across the valley, and she used those curtains like moving walls. Every loose pebble was a risk. Every scrape of gear on stone could become a death sentence. Visibility shifted unpredictably as smoke drifted and sunrise glare bloomed. Light that should have helped now threatened to give her away, to flash off glass, to paint her as a silhouette on rock. Her optic lens took dust, fine grit that could distort a sight picture at the worst moment. She cleaned it with a breath and a cloth, careful not to leave a reflective flash. Slow hands, calm hands, function hands. Above, the drone's whine came and went. She timed her moves between its passes, listening for pitch changes that meant it was turning. The drone was a threat, but it was also a metronome. If she could read its rhythm, she could move inside it. Time pressure sharpened. Extraction wasn't a plan anymore. It was a deadline. The team in the wadi had minutes before mortars stopped warning and started finishing. Minutes before the enemy pulled the sealed case from the ashes. She chose an impossible route, a narrow goat path that climbed behind a ridge. Steep, exposed, slower than the straight approach, but hidden from the kill box. Dead ground, the kind of path locals and animals used because they had no choice. Halfway up, she found evidence that made her skin go cold. Faint tape marks on rocks. A cached water bottle wedged into a crack. Small, deliberate signs of pre-scouting. Confirmation that the enemy had planned this. Timed it. Prepared for it. This wasn't an opportunistic attack. This was a professional raid. She paused in a pocket of shadow to control her breathing. Slow inhale. Slow exhale. Heart rate down. The body wants to sprint when it's scared. Sprinting makes hands shake. Shaking makes shots miss. Missing gets people killed. She checked her ammo. Limited match rounds on her person. Enough for decisions, not for a prolonged duel. She couldn't afford to fight like a machine gun. She had to fight like a scalpel. She set a tiny diversion, nothing theatrical. A nudged rock that would slide a few seconds later. A pebble dropped into a crack that would echo downslope. Something that might pull the drone's attention for half a minute, or at least make the enemy look where she wasn't. Then she reached a notch with a razor-thin view line. The valley opened like a map. The wadi, the burning shack, the ridgeline positions, everything connected now. The enemy's pattern wasn't random. It was a system. She built her hide fast. Dirt, cloth, patience, no theatrics. She became part of the ridge. Sunrise became her tool. The light would silhouette movers near the shack while her notch stayed in shadow. The glare would wash out certain angles, making it harder for the drone to pick out shapes. If she timed it right, she could see them while they couldn't see her. Now the battlefield wasn't chaos. It was a list. She identified true force multipliers. The spotter team feeding corrections, the jammer operator controlling the air, and the person coordinating mortar fire, stepping in and out, gesturing, controlling tempo. And somewhere, the brain of the ambush, someone who would reveal himself only when things started to slip. She steadied on her first permissionless shot, knowing it had to do more than kill. It had to break the machine. Down in the wadi, the RPG team shifted. The launcher shouldered. The last cover about to vanish. She waited a heartbeat longer. Not because she hesitated, but because she wanted certainty. Then she took the shot. One clean crack. The RPG gunner dropped at the exact moment he was about to fire. A threat removed not by luck, but by timing, by choosing the 1 second that mattered most. The enemy's tempo stuttered. In that stutter, she saw her opening. Her target ladder formed in her mind like rungs on a ladder out of hell. First, the jammer operator. Restore friendly coordination, even partially, because isolated fighters die. Second, the drone controller or primary spotter. Blind the enemy's eyes so their mortar becomes stupid again. Third, any remaining RPG element or crew-serve threat that could collapse cover with one pull. Fourth, squad leaders moving between positions, the ones keeping everyone disciplined. Fifth, the mortar correction lead. Stop the bracketing that was tightening around the wadi. Sixth, the commander, only if he revealed himself. Decapitate the plan when the moment arrives. She started with restraint. 2 easy targets stepped into view, rifleman eager, exposed. She let them live. Bodies weren't the problem. Systems were. She tracked the spotter. The tell was subtle. The way he didn't shoot as much as he watched, the way he kept glancing at the drone's path, the way his hand moved toward his radio. She didn't center punch him. She put the round into the space that mattered. His radio pack, his shoulder line. He collapsed with a sharp jerk, not dead maybe, but out of the fight, his observation broken. The enemy fire wavered again. A pause, confused. Without clean corrections, their bursts lost their sharpness. Then she found the jammer operator. He wasn't labeled. He didn't wear a sign. But his posture gave him away, the way he handled a rig with an antenna, the way another man hovered close like a handler. The jammer's presence had been felt more than seen. Now it was visible. She took him. The crack rolled across the valley. The jammer operator dropped, and in the wadi, radios flickered back into something like life. half syllables, broken transmissions, but enough to prove the air wasn't entirely owned anymore. The team leader heard a fragment, static, and a word that might have been his call sign, and his brain snapped from survive to move. He shoved a hand signal down the line. 2 fingers. Move. Now. But they couldn't move yet. Not with mortars still walking the edges. Not with that correction lead stepping out, arm raising, finger pointing, making the invisible math of death. The mortar correction lead stepped into the open to re-bracket, confident in his dominance. That was her turning point. She took him clean at the moment he signaled. 1 shot, and a mortar fire stalled like a machine that had lost its operator. The next round didn't land where it should have. The bracketing loosened. The invisible fence sagged. In that sag, the friendly team surged. Not a heroic charge, short, violent bounds. Drag the wounded man. Toss smoke. Move to the next piece of cover. Get out of the bowl. The team leader's voice cut through static when it could, and when it couldn't, his arms did the talking. Function over fear. The enemy realized what was happening. They felt their system being dismantled, and professionals adapt. A counter hunt began. A flanking pair started climbing toward the notch using dead ground. They moved like climbers, like men who had done this before, slow, careful, staying behind rock spines, always thinking about angles. The drone swept wider. It searched for lens glint, for heat, for the tiny betrayals a human body couldn't always prevent. A heavier weapon set up to suppress likely ridge lines, a belt-fed or a designated rifle, something meant to chew stone and force her to duck. She stayed calm because panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. She shifted her hide by meters, not miles, staying in the same firing solution but changing the drone's pattern recognition. A small move could make a big difference when someone was hunting by probability. She used the sunrise glare like a shield. If the drone had a look into the light, its camera would wash out. Its operator would see ghost images and bright smear instead of a clear target. She set a decoy, something reflective in a different crack, positioned so the drone would catch it first. The enemy's heavier weapon barked at the decoy, chewing rock, thinking it had pinned her. She stayed still in her actual hide, dust drifting down around her like snow. Down near the shack, enemy movers reached the scorched remains and started digging. Their urgency was the clearest proof, yet of motive. They weren't searching for trophies. They were searching for the sealed case, for data, for something that could blind the patrol routes that came after this. And then another constraint landed, not technical, but human. A local herder, confused by smoke, drawn by the noise, or simply unlucky, wandered near the shack area, a small figure in the wrong place at the worst moment. The enemy used the chaos, moving near him, blending. She had a shot that would have been easy. She didn't take it. Collateral wasn't just a moral problem. It was a strategic one. A single wrong round could turn a clean defense into a disaster that outlived the firefight. She waited, jaw tight, letting seconds burn because sometimes the hardest trigger pull is the one you don't make. The enemy's urgency sharpened. They shouted now. Their discipline frayed. And that's when the commander revealed himself, not with a banner, but with behavior. He stepped into open ground to scream direction, to slap a radio, to physically push movers toward the shack's remains. He was the brains stepping into the light because the machine was failing and he couldn't stand it. He thought the ridge was his. He thought the wadi was his. He thought the morning belonged to him. She felt the world narrow into a line. Wind steady, breath held. 1 round left for the choice that mattered most. This wasn't about killing a man. It was about breaking cohesion, about snapping the enemy's will into fragments so the friendly team could live. She took the shot at sunrise. 1 perfect crack. The commander dropped, the sudden absence of his motion more powerful than any scream. For half a second, the enemy didn't understand. Then they did. And when they did, the plan broke. Leader's gone. Jammer down. Drone observation degraded. Mortar corrections dead. The attackers shifted from plan to survival, their fire turning less coordinated, more angry, less useful. The flanking pair stalled, unsure if the notch was still a trap. In the wadi, the team leader felt the difference like air returning to a room. He didn't waste it. He pushed the team out of the kill box, dragging the wounded man, bounding toward the extraction point the moment the terrain gave them a corridor. They reached the sealed case area as enemy hands were still digging through scorched debris. A brief, brutal exchange at close range, short, controlled violence. Then the case was either recovered whole or recovered in pieces that mattered most. If anything sensitive had been exposed, it was denied quickly. No hesitation, no debate. Some things were too dangerous to leave behind. Rotors thundered in the distance, growing from a suggestion into a presence. The helicopter wasn't salvation. It was a closing window. The team loaded fast. Wounded first. Priority cargo secured. Faces smeared with soot. Hands trembling from fatigue and adrenaline. The team leader did one last head count that felt like prayer. She wasn't there yet. She moved off the ridge last, slipping out of the notch as the drone searched elsewhere, using the enemy's confusion as her cover. She kept low, kept moving, kept invisible, because the moment you think you've won is the moment the battlefield takes it back. When she reached the extraction point, she didn't arrive like a hero. She arrived like someone finishing a job. Quiet, controlled, alive. Inside the aircraft, the noise was deafening and somehow soothing. Rotor wash, metal vibration, the smell of fuel and sweat and smoke. The wounded man was stabilized, eyes unfocused but breathing. Someone pressed a hand to his shoulder just to feel that he was still there. As the valley shrank below them, the adrenaline dump hit. The kind of exhaustion that makes limbs feel borrowed. The kind of silence that follows violence like an aftershock. Someone finally asked what everyone had been thinking since the first impossible crack at dawn. Who made those shots? She didn't answer right away. Not because she wanted drama, but because she wasn't sure how to speak in a world that had been nothing but breath counts and trigger pressure for the last hour. She stared out the open doorway, watching smoke rise from the shack in a black column, a scar against the pale morning. Back at base, the debrief was held in a dim tent that smelled like canvas and stale coffee. Maps were spread on a table. Burnt debris was bagged. The unit's faces looked older in the harsh light. Leadership confirmed what the fight had already implied. The enemy had aimed for the sealed case. The case wasn't magic. It wasn't a bomb. It was something more valuable in this kind of war. Sensitive route and sensor data. A crypto/key module tied to surveillance coverage and patrol patterns. With it, the enemy could blind future patrols, create safe corridors, stage ambushes like the one they just survived. And with the drone footage, they could craft a propaganda victory, proof that they could hit a supply point, burn it, trap a patrol, and walk away with the prize. They've been testing response time, timing the extraction window, measuring how fast help could arrive. It wasn't just an attack. It was a rehearsal for something bigger. The accelerant smell near the hinge made sense now. The shack had been pre-treated. They wanted it burning fast to force movement, hide their grab, collapse visibility. Fire as a tool, not a tantrum. The comms flutter at the valley bend wasn't terrain noise. It had been a test, a brush of jamming to see if anyone noticed, to see if the patrol would adjust, to see if routine would keep marching forward. Routine had marched. The enemy had counted on it, and she had refused to. When the higher-ranked voice that had dismissed her Overwatch request sat in the debrief, his posture was different. Not ashamed exactly, just quieter. The lesson had landed without needing a lecture. Complacency wasn't betrayal, but it was still dangerous. Someone asked about the token in her kit, about why she moved the way she did, about why she seemed to treat every routine step like it could be the last. She didn't give a long story. She didn't need to. The truth was simple and heavy. She'd lost someone once in a routine ambush, a teammate who didn't get a second chance, a moment where the wrong assumption became permanent. The token was a small piece of that history, carried not as grief on display, but as a private vow. Routine doesn't write the ending. That vow had brought her up the goat path, had kept her calm when the drones searched, had made her wait through easy targets and choose the ones that mattered, had made her hold fire when a civilian wandered too close, had made her take one perfect shot at sunrise when a commander stepped into the open. In the days that followed, The unit's respect shifted, not with speeches but with small, real things. A seat saved at a table. A nod in a hallway. Her name spoken cleanly and with intention. Her role acknowledged without someone needing to make it a headline. There was talk of commendations, of citations, of formal recognition. There was also scrutiny, because what she'd done had broken protocol. She had moved without comms, without clearance, without permission. She had acted like the only person who understood that sometimes permission arrives too late. Leadership waited honestly. Rules exist for reasons, but so does judgment. And judgment had kept people alive. Later, alone, she sat with the token in her palm for a moment longer than usual. Not as a ritual, but as an exhale. The valley was behind them. The shack was ashes. The wounded man was stable. The sealed case was secure. The enemy's plan had been snapped at the hinge point where it mattered most. She closed her hand around the token and tucked it away again, because grief didn't end and vows didn't retire. They just changed shape. On the next patrol board, the route looked the same on paper. Lines and bends. A bend where comms fluttered. A ridge that owned the basin. A supply point that could be rebuilt. But nothing about it felt routine anymore. Somewhere in the distance, morning light spilled over rock the same way it always did. Quiet. Indifferent. Honest. And the loudest thing on the battlefield, she knew now, wasn't the fire or the mortars or the rotor wash. It was a choice made in silence. The final image stayed with the team long after the debrief ended. Sunrise reflected in the helicopter window as the valley shrank below, smoke rising like a scar, and her hands, steady hands, finally unclenching as if they'd been holding the whole morning together.